Right now, at this very moment, someone you once meant everything to is thinking about you and they can't escape it. Not because they want to remember, but because they can't forget. There is no message being sent, no words being spoken, no dramatic confession unfolding, just silence. But inside that silence, something is unraveling. Something they tried to ignore is now demanding to be felt. They thought they had control. They thought walking away, pulling back, or treating you like something temporary would bring them peace. But instead, it created something far more powerful than attachment: absence. And absence does something dangerous. It forces the mind to see what it refused to see before. Now your memory isn't soft, it's sharp. It returns without permission. In quiet moments, in late hours, in spaces where distraction once worked, but no longer does. What they once had easy access to now exists only in fragments of memory they can't silence. And here's the truth they're slowly realizing: it was never just you. It was how you made them feel. And now that feeling is gone, and nothing they try can replace it. Regret does not arrive the moment something is lost. It takes shape much deeper, in a place most people rarely examine. It begins in the unconscious, where all the things we ignored, dismissed, or failed to understand are quietly stored. When someone lets go of a meaningful connection, their conscious mind often justifies it quickly. The ego steps in, offering reasons, explanations, even relief. It tells them they made the right choice, that nothing truly valuable was lost, that something better will come along. On the surface, everything seems settled. But beneath that surface, something entirely different is unfolding. The unconscious does not accept explanations so easily. It does not operate on convenience or comfort. Instead, it records truth in its rawest form: every emotion felt, every moment of connection, every subtle significance that the conscious mind chose to overlook. At first, this hidden layer remains quiet, almost patient, as if waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment usually comes when distractions begin to fade, when external noise no longer keeps the mind occupied. This is when regret starts to form, not as a clear realization, but as a disturbance, a feeling that something is not quite right. The person may not immediately understand it. They might feel restless, slightly uneasy, unable to pinpoint why certain thoughts keep returning. The unconscious begins to push fragments upward: memories, sensations, emotions that were never fully acknowledged. These are not random, they are precise reflections of what was once meaningful. What makes this process so powerful is that it bypasses the ego. The same ego that once justified the loss now struggles to maintain its narrative. It cannot easily silence what the unconscious reveals. The person starts to remember things differently. Moments they once considered ordinary begin to carry weight. Conversations replay with new meaning. The absence of what they lost becomes more noticeable than its presence ever was. This is the slow awakening of regret. It is not a single realization, but a gradual unfolding. The unconscious forces the individual to confront a truth they were not ready to see before, that they did not fully understand the value of what they had. And because this realization comes from within, not from external influence, it feels undeniable. There is also a certain inevitability to this process. The more someone tries to suppress these emerging feelings, the stronger they become. Ignored emotions do not disappear, they transform and return with greater intensity. The unconscious insists on being heard, and regret becomes its voice. It speaks through repetition, through emotional weight, through the quiet persistence of memory. Over time, the person begins to connect these feelings with their past actions. What was once unconscious starts becoming conscious. They see the gaps in their awareness, the moments where they failed to act, failed to appreciate, failed to recognize what was in front of them. This is not a comfortable realization. It carries a certain heaviness because it cannot be undone. The clarity they have now contrasts sharply with the blindness they had before, and this is why regret feels so consuming. It is not just about missing someone, it is about facing oneself. It is the recognition that the loss was not simply an event, but a consequence of something deeper within the inability to see clearly at the time. The mind has a peculiar way of protecting itself in the moment, only to betray that protection later. When something meaningful is slipping away, the ego often dulls the intensity of it. It convinces the person that what is happening is not as significant as it truly is. It minimizes emotions, avoids discomfort, and chooses control over vulnerability. In doing so, it creates a kind of blindness one, where the individual is present physically, but not fully aware emotionally. They see, but they do not truly perceive. They hear, but they do not deeply listen. At the time, this feels like strength. It feels like clarity, like independence, like making a rational decision. The ego thrives in this space because it maintains order. It keeps things simple, manageable, and within the boundaries of what feels safe. But what the ego often ignores are the subtle emotional signals that carry deeper meaning, the small gestures, the quiet connections, the unspoken understanding between two people. These are not loud enough to demand attention in the moment, so they are easily overlooked. However, the mind does not discard these experiences. It stores them, carefully and completely. Every moment that was dismissed, every feeling that was suppressed, every detail that was not fully appreciated remains intact beneath the surface. And once the situation has passed, once the person is no longer present in the same way, something shifts. Without the immediate need to maintain control, the ego begins to lose its grip. The mind is no longer focused on justifying decisions or maintaining a certain image. It becomes quieter, more reflective. And in that quiet, the stored experiences begin to resurface. But they do not return in the same way they were originally lived. They come back with clarity, with emotional depth that was absent before. The person starts to replay moments, not because they choose to, but because the mind brings them forward. A simple conversation that once felt ordinary now reveals layers that were missed. A look, a tone, a gesture suddenly carries meaning that was invisible at the time. The mind reconstructs these memories with a new awareness, filling in the emotional gaps that were previously ignored. This is where the tension begins. The ego, which once dismissed these experiences, now struggles to reconcile with what the mind is presenting. There is a growing contrast between what the person believed then and what they are beginning to understand now. The narrative they created no longer aligns with the truth emerging from within. And so the replay continues, not as a passive memory but as an active process. The mind revisits the same scenes, examining them from different angles, searching for understanding. It is almost as if it is trying to correct something, to make sense of what was lost by fully seeing it now. But this clarity arrives too late to change the outcome. What makes this process so intense is its persistence. The mind does not simply move on after one reflection. It returns again and again, each time adding more detail, more emotional weight. The person may try to distract themselves, to focus on new experiences, but certain memories remain untouched by these efforts. They linger, waiting for moments of stillness to resurface. Over time, the person begins to realize that what they are experiencing is not random. It is a direct response to what they once overlooked. The mind is not punishing them, it is revealing something that was always there, but never fully acknowledged. The replay is not just about the past, it is about understanding, about seeing clearly what was once hidden behind the comfort of the ego. There is a paradox in human emotion. When something is present, it often blends into the background of life, becoming familiar, almost invisible in its consistency. But when that same presence is removed, it does not simply disappear. Instead, it transforms into something far more noticeable and unknown, absence that echoes in ways presence never could. When someone is part of your daily experience, your mind adjusts to them. Their voice, their energy, their attention, these become woven into your normal state of being. You do not question it because it feels stable. It feels expected. And what is expected rarely feels urgent. The mind does not highlight it as something extraordinary because it assumes it will continue. This is where the subtle danger lies. The more constant something is, less consciously it is valued. But once that presence is gone, the mind is forced into a different state. It can no longer rely on what was once naturally available. And in that shift, something begins to emerge. The absence is not empty, it is filled with contrast. Every moment that once included that person now feels altered. The silence is not neutral, it carries a weight, a difference that is impossible to ignore. This is where the echo begins. The mind starts to notice gaps, spaces where something used to exist. It could be in small routines, in certain times of day, in habits that no longer have the same feeling. These gaps are not just practical, they are emotional. They remind the person, again and again, that something meaningful is missing. And unlike presence, which can be taken for granted, absence demands attention. What makes absence so powerful is that it amplifies what was once subtle. The qualities that were overlooked, the way someone listened, the way they responded, the quiet comfort of their existence, these now stand out with clarity. It is as if the mind increases the volume on everything that was once ignored. And because there is no new interaction to balance or soften these memories, they become more defined, more intense. The person begins to feel this in unexpected ways. A familiar situation arises, but it feels incomplete. A thought occurs, but there is no one to share it with in the same way. These moments create a kind of emotional dissonance, a recognition that something is missing, but also a realization that it cannot be easily replaced. This is why absence echoes louder than presence. Presence is experienced in real time, often filtered through distraction, routine, and the ego's need for control. But absence removes all of that. It strips the experience down to memory and feeling, and in doing so, it reveals the true impact of what was there. The echo is not constant noise, it is selective and precise. It appears in moments of stillness, when the mind is not occupied. It surfaces when something triggers a memory, when a familiar pattern is interrupted. And each time it appears, it reinforces the same realization. What was once ordinary was, in fact, meaningful. Over time, this echo becomes difficult to ignore. It does not fade easily, because it is tied to something real that the person did not fully understand before. The more they become aware of it, the more they recognize the depth of what they lost. And this awareness carries a certain weight because it is accompanied by the understanding that presence could have been experienced differently, more consciously, more fully, if it had been recognized at the time. There is a tendency in human nature to confuse possession with understanding. When something is within reach, the mind assumes it is also fully known, fully experienced, fully appreciated. But that assumption is often an illusion. Control creates a sense of stability, and within that stability, awareness becomes dulled. The person believes they understand the value of what they have simply because it is present in their life. Yet true recognition rarely happens under the comfort of control. When someone feels they have access to another person, their time, their attention, their presence, they begin to operate from a place of certainty. There is no urgency to reflect deeply, no pressure to fully grasp the significance of the connection. The mind relaxes into predictability. It stops questioning, stops observing with intensity, and instead moves into a passive state. This is where value becomes obscured, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer actively seen. Control reinforces this blindness. It creates the belief that things will remain as they are, that there is always more time, more opportunity to understand, more chances to act differently if needed. And because of this belief, the person delays awareness. They postpone appreciation, assuming it can be accessed whenever they choose. But what they fail to realize is that awareness does not function on demand. It requires presence, attention, and a willingness to see beyond the surface in real time. When control is suddenly removed, this entire structure collapses. The certainty that once existed is replaced with unpredictability. The person can no longer rely on access, no longer assume that the connection is available to them. And in that moment, something shifts within the mind. The absence of control creates space for reflection, and in that space, awareness begins to rise. Without control, the person is forced to confront the reality of what they had. There is no longer a way to interact with it directly, to test it, to experience it again in the same form. All that remains is memory and interpretation, and this is where value starts to become clear. The mind, no longer distracted by the illusion of permanence, begins to examine the past with greater depth. What was once taken for granted now stands out with sharp clarity. The person starts to see details they overlooked: the consistency, the effort, the emotional presence that was always there, but never fully acknowledged. These realizations do not come from external influence, they emerge internally, as the mind reconstructs the experience without the distortion of control. This process is often uncomfortable because it reveals a gap between perception and reality. The person realizes that they did not fully understand what they had when they had it. Their previous sense of certainty is exposed as incomplete. And this realization carries a certain weight because it is accompanied by the understanding that the opportunity to perceive it differently has already passed. The loss of control also removes the ability to correct or adjust in the moment. When something is still present, there is always the possibility of change, of deeper engagement, of conscious appreciation. But once it is gone, possibility becomes limited or non-existent. The person is left with awareness, but without the means to act on it in the same way. This is why value is often recognized only after control is lost. Control creates comfort, and comfort reduces attention. But loss disrupts that comfort, forcing the mind into a state of heightened awareness. In that state, things are seen more clearly, more honestly, without the filters that once obscured them. And through that clarity, the true significance of what was lost begins to reveal itself, not as an abstract idea, but as something deeply felt and undeniably real. Within every person there exists a part of the self that remains hidden, unseen, unacknowledged, and often avoided. This is not because it is insignificant, but because it carries elements that the conscious mind finds uncomfortable to face. It holds the traits, impulses, and truths that do not align with the image a person has created of themselves. So it is pushed into the background, kept out of awareness, and left to exist in silence. But what is hidden does not disappear. It waits. When a person loses something meaningful, especially a connection that once held emotional depth, this hidden part begins to stir. At first, it does not announce itself clearly. It emerges through subtle tension, a sense of unease that cannot be easily explained. The person may try to rationalize the loss, to maintain a sense of control and composure, but beneath that effort, something deeper is shifting. This hidden part begins to bring forward truths that were once ignored. It reflects the moments where the person acted out of fear rather than understanding, where they withheld emotion instead of expressing it, where they failed to recognize the impact of their own behavior. These are not comfortable realizations. They challenge the image the person has of themselves, creating a conflict between who they believed they were and what their actions actually revealed. Pain becomes the medium through which this confrontation happens. Not because pain is inherently destructive, but because it breaks down the barriers that once kept these truths hidden. When everything feels stable, there is little reason to question oneself deeply. But when something is lost, when the mind is no longer distracted by control or certainty, the internal defenses weaken. In this state, the hidden aspects of the self become more visible. The person begins to see patterns, ways in which they avoided vulnerability, moments where they chose distance over connection, instances where they dismissed what truly mattered. These patterns are not presented gently. They come with emotional weight, with a sense of responsibility that is difficult to ignore. This is where the confrontation intensifies. The person can no longer place the cause of their loss entirely outside themselves. They are faced with the realization that part of the reason lies within their own unexamined behavior. And this realization is what makes the experience so consuming. It is not just about missing someone, It is about facing a version of oneself that was previously hidden. The more the person tries to avoid this confrontation, the stronger it becomes. Suppression only adds pressure, causing these truths to return with greater intensity. The hidden self insists on being acknowledged, not to punish, but to bring awareness. It forces the individual to see what was once invisible, to understand what was once ignored. Over time, this process begins to reshape their perception. The pain they feel is no longer just tied to the loss itself, but to the understanding of their own role within it. It becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of themselves they must now face directly, without distortion or denial. There comes a point when distraction begins to lose its power. At first, the mind resists the weight of loss by reaching outward, seeking noise, activity, new experiences, anything that can fill the space left behind. It convinces itself that movement is healing, that staying occupied is the same as moving forward. And for a while this works. The constant engagement keeps deeper thoughts at a distance, preventing them from fully forming. But distraction is not resolution. It is only delay. Over time, the things that once kept the mind busy begin to feel less effective. The same activities no longer provide the same relief. Conversations feel incomplete. Moments of excitement fade quickly, and even new connections lack a certain depth. There is a growing sense that something remains unresolved beneath all of it. The mind begins to slow down, not by choice, but because the distractions can no longer sustain the illusion of progress. This is when memory starts to surface more clearly. Without constant noise to suppress it, the past begins to re-emerge with a different intensity. Not as scattered thoughts, but as cohesive experiences. The person starts to recall not just events, but feelings, the emotional atmosphere of what once existed. And these memories carry a certain clarity because they are no longer competing with immediate distractions. They stand alone, fully visible. What makes this stage so difficult is the contrast it creates. The present, despite being filled with activity, begins to feel less meaningful compared to what is remembered. The mind recognizes a difference in depth, in authenticity, in connection, and this recognition cannot be easily dismissed because it is felt rather than simply thought. The person may try once again to return to distraction, to push these memories aside, but something has changed. The awareness has already begun to form, and once it reaches a certain level, it cannot be completely undone. The mind starts to prioritize understanding over avoidance. It no longer wants to escape the feeling, it wants to make sense of it. This is where true loss is felt, not in the initial moment of separation, but in the quiet realization that what was lost carried a significance that cannot be replicated through distraction. The absence becomes more defined, not because it has grown, but because the person can now fully perceive it. They begin to understand that what they are missing is not just a person, but a specific experience, a unique connection that had its own depth and meaning. And with that understanding comes a certain stillness. The mind is no longer running, no longer trying to replace or escape. It is simply present with the realization. The distractions that once seemed necessary now feel insufficient, almost irrelevant in comparison to what is being felt internally. This is the moment where everything becomes undeniable. The person sees clearly what they tried to avoid, feels deeply what they once suppressed, and understands the weight of what is no longer within their reach. In the end, what this entire journey reveals is something deeper than regret itself. It is not just about losing someone or missing what once existed. It is about awakening an awakening that comes too late for action, but not too late for understanding. Every stage, from unconscious denial to painful clarity, uncovers a simple truth. We often do not see the value of something while we still have the chance to experience it fully. The mind protects, delays, distracts, and justifies, but eventually it reveals. And when it does, it leaves no room for illusion. What remains is pure awareness, understanding of what was real, what was overlooked, and what can never be recreated in the same way again. This realization is heavy, but it is also honest. It forces growth, even through discomfort. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning behind it all, not punishment, but transformation. Because once someone has truly seen what they failed to see before, they can never return to that same blindness again. Thank you for listening, and I truly wish you clarity, strength, and peace on your journey ahead. Good luck.